So look, I'm here with Jack. A lot of you know Jack. He's an ex-MMA pro fighter. We're about to do a seminar together, so I'd like to interview Jack. Jack, I was going to ask you a couple of questions. What inspired you to go into the ring? What was the first thing that inspired you?
I've trained martial arts, I guess, since I was a kid, like a lot of guys sort of from my generation that got into MMA. I've always wanted to compete, and there wasn't that many avenues to compete. When I was a kid, there wasn't that many competitions. So as a kid, I was doing knockdown karate, which is Kyokushin. So I did that. From there, I sort of gravitated towards Muay Thai. In Muay Thai, because as I'm sure you know, the most scoring thing in Muay Thai are kicks. The master has always been more hands than kicks. So from then I sort of started gravitating a little bit more towards boxing, and probably around the time when I got into that a little bit more, the Vale Tudo or No Holds Barred, it was pretty much a street fight in a ring on a cage. And you had, those wannabe tough guys come out there and try and slug it out until a couple of guys, including Hoyce Gracie here, turned up a lot smaller than those bigger guys, not hard looking at all, and they would win a fight after fight after fight with superior technique. And as soon as I saw this, I thought, like, this is something I'd really like to do at some point. Again, at the time, not MMA, but like Vale Tudo schools sort of started cropping up here and there. And by the time I started university, there was at least a couple of those in Poland. I started training in one. Loved the training, loved the people I met. I mean, some of the guys I met there are my closest friends till now, including my business partner here. So, and then initially it was just a sport I wanted to do. And I wanted to compete at. Probably about halfway through university, I realised this is something I want to do professionally.
What were you studying at university?
Political science.
Political science?
Yeah, I finished uni as well. I felt like I owe it to my parents and stuff, but I never did anything with it. As soon as I graduated, I packed my stuff and came over here.
You went over, because I see you like you're quite a sports scientist as well, right?
That's more my passion and interest.
Right.
When I was choosing university, I guess just a prime example of the fact you should make life-changing decisions at 19. Like, I thought at the time this is what I wanted to do, and to be fair, I had wanted to do it for probably 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years. And then my enthusiasm fizzled out. I decided I don't want to run political campaigns. I want to fight professionally. So that was quite a drastic change. And as soon as I've graduated, I packed my stuff, came over here, and started training in London.
Wow.
So that was 2005. When it comes to, let's say, fight gyms, from my experience anyway, it was if you get to fight, that's a reward. That's a prestige that you get for hard work. Wow. Not everyone gets to fight, only the best guys get to fight, and you have to earn your right to fight. Here you have kids coming into the class, first class ever, and they ask, when am I going to fight? So I guess it's just a slightly different sort of work ethics and a different mindset. I think, yes, sometimes riding athletes hard can be detrimental, because obviously you can overtrain them. But then again, there's time and place for everything, and it can be character building. Even if it's not the most efficient training method, And obviously then it comes down to sports, because some sports have been around in Poland for a long time, and the training methodology is excellent, right? And we have some very high level guys, world-class wrestlers, great boxers, and so on and so forth, right? But then there are sports which are relatively new, and people are still finding their ways and figuring out how to train athletes. And MMA is a prime example here. You have so many gyms popping up, but MMA as a sport it's a very, very new thing, and there is not enough methodology on how to train athletes. Greco-Roman wrestling has been around for thousands of years, right? Technique hasn't changed. While we know more about sports science and training methods have changed, people have had generations of experience that they can apply their knowledge. With MMA, a lot of guys generally watch YouTube and then try and apply it in their classes, right? They don't necessarily know how to train people for MMA specific things, you know.
Right.
And then you have, let's say, a BJJ coach trying to teach MMA when he's not an MMA coach.
Right.
You know,
That makes sense to me.
or a boxing coach, or a wrestling coach for that matter. Guys that don't necessarily have MMA combat experience, MMA training or teaching experience, try to teach classes in an entirely new sport. And it's tricky, and while it can work sometimes, oftentimes it doesn't. And I think this is where the lack of training, sort of methodology or experience suffers. But this will change. I mean, it's a new sport and it will improve, and we have more and more guys traveling for training to well-established gyms. They come back to their teams, they share the knowledge gained there. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Jack, you're currently now competing as a powerlifter, as well as the head coach for the MMA team in Richmond Fitness Club.
That's correct.
You've got some very great fighters. I know your recent fighter, Charlotte, won 14.
Yes.
I think 14 seconds, wasn't it? Knockout.
Yeah,
It was a cross.
KO, yeah, right hand. You could argue it was not overhand, but yeah, right hand. Yeah, when it comes to the team, obviously you want to see those guys and girls succeed and reach the highest level of sport, and the only thing that I can do on my end is try and create an environment for them where they can thrive and they can grow. But to be fair with these kids, I don't have to. They graft on their own and they have amazing work ethics. And I think I have been really lucky with the hand I've been dealt when it comes to athletes I'm working with. I think that kids like Lonnie or Charlotte would have been great athletes, whichever sport they chose. And I think they would have been great regardless of who coaches them. So while I like to think I have a hand in how good they are, I think they would have been good or that good with any other coach as well, just purely down to their talent and work ethics.
That's very humble, Jack, but I disagree with you there.
Thank you.
I disagree because I've been around coaches, like I said, since the age I was 5. And I'm not saying this because I'm camera, I've said this outside. In my opinion, you're probably one of the most dedicated coaches I've ever met. Your
Thanks,
commitment to them is amazing.
Thank
and
you.
I mean
really
that. I
appreciate
mean that. I'm not just saying it because I mean that. I mean that.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I think like with what I'm trying to give those kids is I've sort of drawn on my own experience and my training as an athlete, and when I was a young fighter and growing up and learning and developing, and all the sort of mistakes that I've made or that were made in my training, in my work with these kids, is try and sort of protect them from the mistakes that I have made or were made in my training. So, prime example would be sparring too often. When I was a young fighter, and sparring too often or sparring 100%, 100% effort all the time. People would pick up injuries all the time. And while you can make arguments that it toughens you up, at some point you don't need to do this that much. You don't need to take unnecessary brain trauma. You don't need to take unnecessary facial injuries, joint injuries, hands injuries, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to do with them is I'm trying to train them smart, most of all. And yes, it is hard training, but first and foremost, I like to think it's smart training.
Are you as passionate about coaching as you were about getting in the ring yourself?
It's a good question. I think even more so. Even more so. When I was definitely not as good a coach as I am now when I was a fighter. Because when I was a fighter, in my own head, I always thought like I'm a fighter first, and then a coach. And obviously because of that, let's say you only have so much energy during the day. Most of my energy will be spent on my training, and then I know there were times when I didn't or couldn't give 100% as a teacher, because I was spent after training 6 hours a day every day. I was just spent. That's changed since I retired from fighting myself. That's completely changed because now my passion, my main focus is coaching and teaching those kids. While I'm very passionate about my powerlifting, it's very different because powerlifting is a hobby to me. You know, this is something I do in my own time.
Right.
And coaching those guys is my main thing. And I don't like to call it a job because it makes it sometimes sound like a chore, and it isn't. I love my job, but it is my job.
Sure.
Whereas powerlifting is a hobby for me. When I was fighting, it was different because fighting was a job.
Sure. And
took most of my effort, most of my energy, and to be honest, a lot of the times it did feel like a chore. You know, it did feel like a chore. You can. It's really hard to stay positive and optimistic when you semi-starve throughout the year. You know, trying to keep your weight low, picking up injuries here and there. So there were times when I didn't enjoy it as much as some other times. Whereas with coaching it, so far at least anyway, it has been an entirely positive experience.
Because I've watched you box, K1, wrestle, powerlift. What would you, in your opinion, and I mean your opinion, right, is what would you say is your best characteristic as a fighter? Because you're horrendously strong, man, so it must be...
in terms of skills?
Yes, technically.
In terms of skills, technically, it would probably have to be my ground and pound,
right,
my wrestling, and my boxing.
Okay.
Probably in that order. And it would also be the same if I was to line those things up in order of the things I enjoy most. It would be the same order. I think with my ground and pound, the thing that made it really good and what it was the fact that I don't think many people approach it as a skill, whereas I treated it as a skill on its own. I practiced it, and I practiced it for hours and hours, and I practiced it from different positions, different scenarios, with different goals on my mind: scoring points, doing damage, cutting people, knocking people out. So I had a whole sort of range of ideas what to do with it in my head, and I feel a lot of people neglect to recognize that it's a skill, and they think, oh well, it's just punching the guy when he's on the floor.
It's a finish. Yeah.
But it's you could say that then boxing is just punching the guy when he's standing, right? It would be just as much of a simplification. The openings, the angles, the setups are very specific to MMA. You don't see it in other sport, and I think it needs to be practiced. And I think I'm a prime example that if you do practice it, you can be very, very good at it.
So a guy comes off the street, Jack, right? He knocks on your door. It's the first time he's been in the gym. Would you know where to take him from day one right till the end?
Absolutely.
So
I mean,
what would that be?
First and foremost, he wouldn't probably get to train in MMA classes for quite a while. He'd be made to train in all the other classes before he's allowed to do MMA. And it's not
so that would be
it's not an elitist thing. It's just if I the way I look at MMA classes is it's a very limited time, and I don't want to be teaching people arm bars or triangles or jabs and crosses or double leg takedowns.
I understand.
We've got wrestling for takedowns. We've got boxing for boxing. We've got Muay Thai, kickboxing. We've got jiu-jitsu for your groundwork. Now, what I teach in MMA, or I like to teach in MMA, is stuff that's MMA specific that you're not going to learn in other classes. How to take a guy down of the cage, of the fence.
Right.
You're not going to learn in wrestling, right? No. How to ground a pound.
Right.
Again, you're not going to learn the wrestling. How to set up submissions with punches or strikes in general. How to set up takedowns with strikes. How to use strikes to complement your takedown defense, and so on and so forth. So it's more of a tactical almost thing than a technical thing, and I expect people in my MMA classes to have certain level of technique already. While they don't have to be great at it, they have to have an idea of what I'm talking about.
I get it.
So I wouldn't let anyone start with MMA classes.
Right, okay.
I would expect them to pick up some basic skills first. Then in MMA classes, we would blend those skills and it would make them MMA applicable, because you can't walk into an MMA fight with a boxing stance, or a wrestling stance for that matter. It has to be a fight or stance that works for MMA. If you stand in a typical boxing stance, you'll get your leg kicked to bits with low kicks. If you stand in your wrestling stance, you'll get a head kick. So you need to adapt your skills picked up from other sports in MMA to make them MMA applicable, and I feel this is what time is best spent on in MMA.
So a
classes.
guy walks into the studio, you'd say, listen, you're not ready for MMA. Technically, tactically, you don't have enough technique to cope with what I'm doing. So you're going to go and learn boxing. You're going to do boxing maybe for a year and a half, so K1.
I wouldn't even necessarily say that long. I mean, obviously this will vary from person to person.
Yeah.
Some people pick up stuff really quickly. Again, to give you an example, when Charlotte came to us, she had zero combat sport experience. She was a very well-trained athlete, a rower, high-level athlete, but not a combat sports athlete. She had her first MMA fight within 8 weeks of first setting foot in the gym, and she finished the girl with a rear naked choke and ground and pounder for a bigger part of the fight. But she's an outlier. She's one of those people who pick up stuff up very, very quickly. Then on the other end, you may have people who are not very well coordinated, not very athletic, not very strong, and on top of all the technical work, there needs to be a lot of work done with them on their athleticism to bring them to a level where they at least won't hurt themselves before they're actually capable of hurting someone else in the fight. And so it will vary from person to person, but I'd like to think, and it is sort of my job as a coach to recognize when they're ready to step up.
And the conditioning is a big part of that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, a tired fighter is just a shit fighter, you know, and it happens. It can happen to any of us. It's happened to me in fights where I got beat purely because I was not fit enough, and it's a horrible, horrible experience and a horrible feeling when you know you're a better guy in there, but you can't demonstrate it because you just don't have the fitness.
Within the SILAT syllabus, right, we call Lanka footwork, right? So there's different types of footwork. You've seen some of the footwork that we use. Some refer to the blade, some refer to stand-up, some refer to maybe multiples, different. Would you, so for example, in your syllabus, would you have like things like footwork? This particular
Absolutely,
type?
yes.
Yeah?
And we would have, I would like to think that after, again, this will vary from person to person, but that after a set amount of time, for someone it can be a couple of months, for someone it can be more than a year, after a set amount of time, I'd like to think they would be able to move around the cage, and I don't mean just aimlessly move, but cut the cage off, for example, right? So make sure that you place your opponent on the wall. Or, on the same token, don't get cut off on the cage. So control the distance, control the cage, so you never get backed up against the fence. I would like to think that after a while they'd be able to set up and execute a takedown rather than just aimlessly run at the guy, you know? In the same way that I'd like to think they can defend the counter takedown, that they can set up a submission with strikes or put themselves in a position where they can finish with strikes. They can fight their way out of submissions or scramble off their back. So after a time of training, I would like a fighter to have some basic, well-rounded level of skills. He's not going to have a whole lot of submission, a whole lot of takedowns, and a whole lot of striking combinations under his belt, but he'll have a bit of everything. And then the more we train, the more we add to it and keep adding to it and keep adding to it. And at some point you notice that your athlete starts to develop his or her own style, because obviously we're built differently, we have different preferences, different limb length, different speed and power, different conditioning levels, and you build your style around your fighter's strengths. At least I like to do this, build it on their strengths. Obviously you don't want to leave their weak links untouched, and you keep bringing them up, because we all have weaker links. But there's no reason to shy away from your athlete's strengths points. So while there is a syllabus that I'd like to use with all my guys early on, sometimes it's almost like sort of throwing a whole lot of stuff at them and see what sticks.
Well look, Jack's going to be here with me doing a seminar on June the 3rd, and I'd highly recommend you guys come. Look, for anyone wanting to learn MMA, thinking about learning MMA, you live in anywhere remotely close in Surrey, listen, Jack's the guy. Or even if you want sports conditioning or personal training, Jack's the guy. It's Richmond Fitness Club, check him out. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Steve.
That's brilliant, man.